Okay, so good afternoon. This is Steve Mazzacane from the Steve Mazzacane podcast. It is 4:03 on Thursday. I think we're live. I'm checking now, and we are. And so this is our final podcast of the week on a short week. We had I don't need my volume, but it helps me to see what the delay is. Just waiting for the notice to go out. With our new system, it takes a little while for people to get the notice that we're live. If you are watching from Madison or Guilford, you can also watch us from the Madison Atticus Facebook page or the Guilford Atticus Facebook page. We'll be doing some marketing on those pages as well to get the word out that we will be live Monday through Thursday at 4 o'clock. Um, and we don't know what the final version of this podcast will be, but based on the feedback that's been fairly positive so far, it may extend to an hour based on topics. Um, Possibly more of them. I'm not quite sure what the future will hold. But we're just happy right now. This week, the goal was to get to more areas. We'll start covering more geographic regions over time, and we'll start covering more issues, and certainly as they apply to our towns that we're covering, and also national, state, and national issues. We do now have the ability, it's a little easier now to start doing some interviews. We will start having some guests. We'll try to have some candidates on in the near future and talk to them as we get closer to election time. I don't want to make it an everyday thing, but maybe once a week have guests on. So we'll certainly take suggestions along those regards. Vinny, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Okay, so today I spent much of the morning reading over the Woodward articles, um, looking at what Trump said, what he knew, some of the issues there. For many people who are watching this are just used to us that haven't followed us in the past. If you are in the camp that you are so hardcore Trump that you don't want to listen to anything remotely critical of him, this may not be the podcast for you. If you're of the camp that Trump is evil and is the worst thing that ever happened to the world and should be killed, whatever, this is also may not be the podcast for you. What we want to do here is look at things objectively. Doesn't mean we're not going to have our own biases. We all have our own history. We all have different issues that he talks about that affect us differently. But we want to be able to look at issues as if we're historians, as if we're standing back even 5 or 10 years after the fact. What are the facts, and what is a reasonable approach to looking at them? So my hope in the discussion is to try to look at things in a way that I may not even look at it earlier, or you may not look at it earlier. And if it doesn't mean you're going to walk out of a podcast here changing your mind, it doesn't mean you're going to have a different viewpoint, but at least you will have looked at things a little bit differently. In fact, there are times that I may talk about something that it may not be my personal belief. I'll tell you what it is, but for the sake of argument, to look at things as historians, as in the scope of history, we want to detach ourselves emotionally from the issue and look at different possibilities. There is no such thing as knowing the full scope of anything right now. Woodward has this book out with the things we're going to know in 5 years or 10 years about the coronavirus, or how Trump handles foreign policy, or how he works in the White House. It will be drastically more down the road. And that's hopefully what we can talk about and discuss on this podcast. If everybody has opinions, we understand that. But my hope is that when you come on and we start talking about it, that you take those preconceived notions, let's leave them out, let's start from scratch, let's look at things as historians and see what we come up with. Doesn't mean you're going to walk out of here with your mind changed. It does mean that hopefully you're part of a discussion where we can look at things in new lights and try to take a more well-rounded approach to what's happening. I do not subscribe. To those that are new, I'll state this. I did not vote for Trump, and there's a very almost no chance I would vote for him again or vote for him this year. And I say that just to get that out of the way. I'm not a supporter of his primarily because of foreign policy. I believe the main job of a president is foreign policy, but we'll talk about that a little bit as we go forward. We did talk a little bit yesterday about how Trump has handled COVID. And so I'm going to open up. I have used CNN and Politico today, and I read most of their coverage on Bob Woodward's new book, which is called Rage. Now, I am giving Bob Woodward, an accomplished journalist, I believe an honest journalist, the benefit of the doubt. From what I have read, Woodward wrote a book earlier that was very critical of Trump, that did not feature actual interviews of Trump. Trump, despite advice not to, decided to sit down with Woodward for a second book. That's politically may not have been the best idea in the world, but he did, and he chose to. That may have been an act of arrogance, just thinking he could, schmooze his way through a Woodward interview. I don't know, but I think it's come back and probably something he shouldn't have done. And he has since been pretty hard and posted today a few things about not trusting the book or Woodward set him up or whatever. So, just reading some comments that are coming in. So as we talk about this, I'm going to give you my opinion. And there's some things I'm going to be much harder on Trump than COVID. Now, from every Democrat on the planet, from Chris Murphy to Biden to even Obama, they're placing the death of 180,000 people in the United States on Trump. I simply cannot get on board with that theory. We're not comparing Trump's actions to some hypothetical president who would have shut down the country on March 1st and solved the problem. That's not what's happened. In hindsight, we may look at it that way, but information was coming in much slower. He clearly, based on the interviews we have, knew how serious this was, and publicly he gave a somewhat different, basically said we're going to get through this and we got our handle on this and what have you. I don't see it as unusual for a president to want to avoid public hysteria. I think many presidents do that, even in times of crisis. So I'm not looking at this as, well, he knew one thing, but he lied to the public. No, you don't go to the public and say, listen, this can cause 180,000 deaths. He didn't know that, but that's not what, if you did, it would not have been something you said. So I don't have a significant issue with what most of the media is going crazy on. He did not cause 180,000 deaths. People were going to die no matter what. He was not responsible for every senior living facility and every nursing home where many of these deaths took place. He was not responsible for the states doing many of their own things on their own. He was not responsible for not having all the information that simply wasn't available. We talk about listening to the scientists. Science changes. The information we have early on has changed over time. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Young people can get it, young people can't get it. All of these things kept changing. And while we knew there was a virus, we knew there was a need to take precaution. Those precautions are not significantly different than we're taking now. Wear a mask when you go out. And so this argument from the left, I don't fully buy into. In fact, I think it kind of gives us a view into what a president has to go through. We've talked about this. There was going to be a casualty toll no matter what happened. If you say he should have shut down the country, and we're already seeing this, mental health issues go up, health insurance issues skyrocket, people couldn't go to the hospital, suicides go up. That happens. As the unemployment rate goes up, people die. So this wasn't an issue of keep us all safe or get us all killed. You had to decide which way to go and to what degree. There was no immediate right answer at that time. And looking past hindsight, in time, I think we'll see that. We didn't know all the information we had. We knew it was serious, but at the same time, you have to make sure there's no mass hysteria. I cannot take the same tone that I'm seeing much of the media take on that issue. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, on other issues, I'll take a very different tone. And it's really, to be honest with you, quite impressive looking at a separate article. There's an article on CNN, and I don't subscribe to the CNN is bad, or this is pretty good, these are exact quotes, where Woodward did an interview with Jared Kushner. I'm going to read some of the things he said here, and I think it's eye-opening. I'm not of the opinion Trump has any master plan to what he's doing. There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason, but he does have certain ways of going about things that we can talk about. So this is what Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, talks about. In one instance, after I'm going to read directly from the CNN article. In one instance, after a meeting on criminal justice reform with Trump, Senator Mike Lee is quoted as saying he was surprised and delighted that the president had agreed to a group of Republican senators' suggestions on sentencing reform. So he said yes, Lee is quoted as saying. No, 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 replied Kushner. That's a soft yes. Woodward writes that Kushner explained to Lee that now someone with an opposing view would come in and convince Trump to change his mind, then the two sides would have to debate. So this is an interesting style. And if you're from Brantford, you may, Uncle Ross, the previous first selectman, did this a lot. Trump likes to please the people in front of him. So instead of waiting to get all the facts, he would give a yes, and Kushner described it as a soft yes, and that person was supposed to somehow know that, wait a minute, someone else might come in with another viewpoint, flatter Trump, and he might get a yes as well, and Trump may change his mind. This is a disastrous way to manage. It doesn't work. And what ended up happening is, we saw this in our town, is that all these people think they're getting their way. Trump ends up with a series of contradictions, for something, against something, for something, against something, based on whoever came to him that day, whoever had a good idea that day. The other part that Woodward talks about are the flattering letters he got from other world leaders. It seems like that the people who flattered him the most got their way. That's an ego problem. So while I am not going to blame Trump for the COVID response, should he have been better? Possibly. But he's not responsible for 180,000 deaths. The way he's managing doesn't make any sense. The way he's taking in information doesn't make any sense. And the way he's giving approval to different people without getting the full scope is a terrible way to manage. And that's a terrible way to manage anything. Forget the country, any business, any small business, the Trump Corporation. It's a ridiculous way to manage and try to judge people and move forward with major, major policies. So that's a bigger issue that I see in the Woodward interview. But let's go forward with more that Kushner said. Alice in Wonderland. This is you can't make this up. In the book, Kushner is quoted describing 4 texts people should absorb if they want to truly understand their president. Woodward writes the texts do not paint a flattering picture of someone who is both Kushner's boss and father-in-law. So one is a Pulitzer Prize piece in the Wall Street Journal. The second text Kushner points to is Alice in Wonderland. I still can't believe Kushner said this. Kushner is quoted as paraphrasing the Cheshire Cat as a means of understanding Trump. And the quote by the Cheshire Cat, not kidding, if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. Woodward writes, did Kushner understand how negative this was? Was it possible the best roadmap for this administration was a novel about a young girl who falls through a rabbit hole, and Kushner was willing to acknowledge that Trump's presidency was on shaky, directionless ground? I don't know how you come to any other conclusion than what Bob Woodward says. This is the quote. If you don't know where you are going, any path will get you there. He's saying about his father-in-law, the President of the United States. If you're a Trump supporter, nothing we're going to talk about today, nothing he has said, nothing he has done should worry you more than the fact that his biggest cheerleader, one of them, his son-in-law, who, from my impression, seems very intelligent. Certainly there's political issues there, but very intelligent person, says that the best way to understand Trump is a quote from Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you are going, any path will get you there. That's some scary shit. If your son-in-law is using that about your father, the President of the United States, that's scary. And there's no other way to look at that. And if you're a Trump supporter, some way, somehow, you have to look at that and say, how do I make that jive with my support for this man? I get that Trump supporters wanted to shake up the system. I get that they were tired of seeing the same names on ballots, whether it be Bush or Clinton or Biden or whatever it is. I get that they felt the whole system was corrupt and we needed somebody in there that was new. But there's a limit to somebody in there that's new to some level of competence, some level of I have a direction, I have a means of taking in information, I have a way to assess facts before making a decision. In these last two instances, we saw somebody who gives somebody a yes before getting all the facts, and then whose own son-in-law says is directionless. That's dangerous. And the question, what are the goals of besides putting up a fence, what were the actual goals of the administration? Was there really nobody else out there who could shake up the system, but do so in a competent manner? And so you have to ask yourself as a voter, are you willing to shake up the system to the point that it no longer works? Are you okay with that? I get shaking up the system, but are you okay with having someone who doesn't take in facts, doesn't take in all the information, and is okay putting out answers without that? You wouldn't do this to anybody. What would you tell your child when it comes to making a decision about what car to buy? If you walk into the Toyota salesman and he tells you you should buy a Camry, and like, yes, I'll buy a Camry. Until the Honda salesman shows up and you listen to him, and yes, you should buy a Honda. Until the BMW says, that's crazy. You gather all the information first and you make a decision. If you don't, it sows confusion. People don't know where you stand. And if we go back to the COVID issue, that's what's probably the bigger issue, is the information at the time, maybe he didn't act appropriately or he did act appropriately. We don't know yet. We won't know that for a long time. But somebody who simply can't take in the entire amount of information needed to make an honest decision, as President of the United States, should be red flags to everyone. That red flag, whether knowingly or not, was raised by his son-in-law, should be eye-opening to anybody. It's just absurd. I'm going to go back, and Kathy, the Democrats are trying to destroy the system, though. Look, we have laws. That's where the system comes from. I get that we want to change seeing the same names there and the same people and the same agenda. The party system is broken as far as I'm concerned. I agree with that. It doesn't make any sense. I have said many, many times on this podcast, political parties are cults. That's what they are. And they are hoping that you buy into whatever message they have, Republicans and Democrats. Democrats, as a registered Democrat, I think in the last 6-7 years have gotten much, much worse. That's just my opinion. I don't subscribe to the idea that I'm supposed to listen to the party leaders. But you can say, I want to shake up the system. I want to change the system. I don't like the system. But replacing the system with somebody who doesn't have a standard, normal, intelligent, logical process for processing information, when the decisions made impact thousands, millions of lives, is dangerous. I could shake up the system. If I was made president tomorrow, I can talk about getting rid of some of the old guard, getting rid of those people, starting anew. The system we have, when it's blank, the constitutional system is a good system. The people can change. We can do that. But we can do it while taking in information. We could do it while fact-finding, gathering information before we come to conclusions that impact everybody. Of all the things I've read from Woodward, all the aspects of this book, this is the most damning. To me anyway. The second most damning is what the generals have said. Now, there's an interesting way to look at Trump's lack of a plan. When it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to the military operations or what have you, there's a concept of proportional response, right? So whenever China puts an embargo on X, the United States responds with a similar embargo. If it's military, somebody bombs this, we bomb something similar. The responses to things are proportional. It is my belief, and based on the generals as well, who were up at night not knowing if this guy was going to start a nuclear war, that Trump has been successful in not starting more wars, in part because the rest of the world didn't know how he would respond to anything. He was a complete wild card. And that's dangerous. It's worked so far because they don't know if they were to say, here's an embargo on the United States steel, they might say, all right, we're buying nothing from that country again, a bankrupt country. Trump could do disproportional responses without thoughts of long-term impacts. And that likely has taken the rest of the world and said, well, let's think twice before doing this. Maybe that's even prevented some wars, but it hasn't made for good foreign policy. And it hasn't made for a military that can rely on this person as a leader. So while I understand the sentiment that led to Trump being elected, how does a Trump supporter, and we can keep saying we have to shake up the system, I get that, but does Trump have to be the person that does that? Is there another person that you feel would shake up the system? Did he just happen to be the guy when the sentiment to shake up the system was overflowing? One of the comments, Trump is not an ideologue. You come to him with a good idea, he will try to get it done no matter what party it comes from. He has not gotten us into any necessary conflicts. He's bringing soldiers home, all good. Okay, so let's talk about that comment. I don't think he's an ideologue. No, I don't know that he stands for anything in particular. And the problem when you don't have an overriding belief system or overriding guidelines is we have no idea if anything ever fits in there. So if one meeting happens and you say yes, and the next meeting happens, you say yes, if they're in conflict, you've got a problem. And if you keep saying yes to different people with different ideas, you're going to have some serious issues because you're going to have a lot of people thinking they're getting something they're not. So there is, if you're running a business, if you're running a household, if you're doing anything where you're leading other people, there has to be an overriding view or goal that we're trying to accomplish. Trump has not shown that, and he has not shown an ability to stick within that goal. And this isn't my words. Let's go back to what his son-in-law said. His son-in-law, literally, this is not, Kushner points to Alice in Wonderland, is quoted as paraphrasing the Cheshire Cat as a means of understanding Trump. Here's the quote from Kushner. If you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. That's a guide to understanding Trump. His son-in-law is telling you the guy doesn't know where we're going. What are his goals? Because if you don't have goals, nothing else matters besides a wall and Mexico. And so as I read all of these Woodward, and I trust Woodward, I think he's a good journalist. I'm not going to knock him. Trump wants to go after him. Trump, on his own, decided to sit down with this man. He has audio recordings of the interviews. You can't question them. I do think the media is taking some of the COVID reactions out of context. Basically, the context of what was happening at the time. As a nation, we didn't have a lot of information. People realized China hid a lot from us. Scientists have changed their viewpoints based on information. That's science. That's a good thing. I can't blame him for the death of 180,000 people. That's not a logical conclusion. That's political posturing. But even in COVID, the same things that we're seeing from his son-in-law, the same things that we're seeing complaints from generals, the same issues that we're seeing from many of the staff members that talked to Woodward was an inability to focus on issues, giving out answers without getting all the facts, changing his mind based on who he spoke with at that moment, and a fairly consistent theme that people who got what they want knew how to flatter him. A leader that I want says, give me an issue, and when they hear from one person, says, okay, thank you. Now I want to hear from an opposing view, and then another opposing view, and another opposing view. And then I want to analyze those things and make a decision. That's a leader. Saying yes to different people who come in and flatter him and make it a very biased argument isn't leadership. It costs lives. So I'm willing to give him a little bit of pass on COVID. The rest of these quotes, the rest of these interviews, recorded interviews in many cases, are damning. And the question I would have for you, if you are if you classify yourself not just a Trump voter, a Trump supporter and a Trump voter are two very different things. I get that some people voted for Trump as the lesser of two evils, didn't like Hillary, don't like the Democrats, whatever. But to those that are fully behind him, he's my guy. If you had to hire somebody to run your company, where your livelihood was at stake, seeing quotes like this from generals who work with him, from his own son-in-law, would you hire him? And you don't have to answer that. But that's the question I come up with. Would you hire him to run a company, not a country, just a company, based on what we saw from the people who have been closest to him, including a family member? Fred Russo, I think his platform is America first. Everything is measured against that statement nationally, internationally. Well, then your foreign policy is going to be awful. Period. I mean, I'm a foreign policy guy. Listen, George Washington's job was foreign policy, right? The job of the president starts with foreign policy. So if your guideline is America first for everything, and this is, we'll talk about this more as we get more to election, that's why I cannot vote for him. Because foreign policy dictates that just saying America first to everything is not a foreign policy. And it makes for more enemies. So maybe there hasn't been a war started, but there's more enemies out there. Kathy, verifying and fixing legal immigration would solve a lot. Okay, all right, we can talk. We can have a podcast on immigration. The Dems have put up two horrible candidates. I'm not arguing that. I don't think Biden's horrible. I don't think Hillary was horrible. I voted for Hillary, and I thought Hillary was incredibly intelligent. There was just a lot of baggage. I get it. I get that people were tired of it. I get that people were tired of hearing the same names. Same thing with Bush. I think people were just tired of it. Walton Burns, but it does say something that the president literally said that it's interviewed that it's worse than the flu, and then the conservative talking point was it's just the flu, and he never pushed back on that. All right, well, let's just hold him accountable for what he actually said, not what he didn't push back on. And you can say it's worse than the flu. Look, you could say this is a serious issue while still portraying confidence and let's not overreact publicly. And that's happened many times. So that's the political decision to make. And I think there are other competent politicians who would have made a similar decision. I don't think that's a crazy decision to make. Clearly, that was a conscious decision to say, I know this is an issue. I think he was working behind the scenes. He could have done things faster with PPE or things of that nature. You also have 50 different smaller countries that you're overseeing with different politics involved there too. So I can't blame him. And hindsight will get better. A month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, we'll know even more. But I'm not going to kill him. John Mancini, he would be my first choice to run a company. Okay, I'm not sure I would agree. Kathy, no, but we have a choice. But we have. I'm sorry, I'm reading this wrong. This is on whether or not you'd hire him. No, but we have a choice of two for president. Yeah, okay. Listen, I can't argue with you on that. If you feel Biden is not the guy, the next comment is I wouldn't hire the person with dementia. I don't think he has dementia, but we have an age minimum. There might be a time when we start looking at an age maximum. It may not be a crazy idea, but at the end of the day, yes, you do have to pick between two people. And if your mentality is you're picking the lesser of two evils, I'm not going to choose Trump in that regard, but I can understand why you may. However, I go back to a very simple question. There's someone running for state rep in Brantford who I have stated I do not feel is qualified to run for office. Based on the information we have in actual statements from family members that are on his team, his supporters, from generals that have worked with him, I question whether this is someone who has the ability to put a logical plan in place to move the country forward. I get wanting to shake up the system, understand it. But this interview, take the COVID stuff out for a second. All the media is focusing on COVID. I don't focus on that. As the science changes, things are going to change. But he clearly has no process in place to process information. It's the first thing we teach our kids: how to take in information, how to get different opinions. On this podcast especially, we try to look at things at multiple different angles. What's the Democratic view? What's the Republican view? What's the right view? Before we come to any conclusion. We have a president who does the opposite of that, where his son-in-law to the point says, no, he may have told you yes, but that's a soft yes. And somebody has to qualify that, because he may change his mind the next day if somebody walks in his office and flatters him with a different opinion. That's not leadership. Granted, the context is you're picking between two people. Maybe that's unfortunate. But that's our podcast for today. We just wanted to go over, the Woodward. I've been fascinated by it. I've been reading all the excerpts coming up. I trust Bob Woodward. And having these recorded only adds to that. Having Trump willingly, of his own accord, sit down for these interviews adds legitimacy as well. And it was probably, Steve, will you have a podcast on the month overreach with his executive order extension? We could talk about that next week. That's certainly legitimate. That's extending it to February on his orders for COVID. So we could talk about that next week. I'll make sure I bring that. Appreciate it. But guys, have a great weekend. Enjoy your Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We'll be back on Monday at 4 o'clock. For those joining us from other towns, welcome. Thanks for joining us. It's probably the first week you've joined us. If there are suggestions or things you'd like us to change or topics you'd like us to talk about, like me to talk about, I'd be glad to. If you appreciated the podcast, even if you didn't agree with it, consider clicking share and let others know, and I'd very much appreciate that. If I don't see you until Monday at 4 o'clock, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.